Hi, Christina from California in Riverside. Oh, we are in Riverside, by the way. I'm here in the meeting with my colleague Rosendo Aguilar. We are both interpreters from Oakland, California, but we are here in Riverside because tomorrow we're going to go to the conference organized by, but our amazing colleague Luis Hernandez here in Riverside Department of Education. So we are very excited about that opportunity. Spanish medical interpreter. Nice to meet you, Lynn. Good to see you. Hi, Katie. And if Rosendo, can you welcome more people while I'm here? And I think we are good to go. So let's begin. And today, introduce Kelly Enriquez, and she's our awesome trainer today. And Kelly is a dual certified Spanish medical healthcare interpreter in Richmond, Virginia. She acquired her BA from Virginia Commonwealth University with a concentration in Spanish and completed their SETI, that is a Spanish English Translation and Interpretation Program. Kelly began her career in language services at a local safety net clinic and has since been interpreting on site. During the pandemic, she began her YouTube channel for interpreters to provide free and accessible continuing education, so check it out. And shortly thereafter, she became a medical interpreter trainer with Americans Against Language Barriers. So hello, Kelly, take it away.
Hi, Ava. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. So it's going to be a little weird. You're going to see my face twice, but no worries. It's normal. Yep, see, I told you you'd see my face twice, and now we're good. All right. So today we're going to be talking about ethical decision making. So you may have seen that in the chat, I posted a link. All right. So I'm going to actually switch my input real quick just so I can show you what we're doing. There's a little poll that I have up on Mentimeter. I'm going to paste that link in the chat one more time. So that link is in the chat for those of you who just joined. We're just answering some questions as we get started. I see we only have two people have responded so far. And I will be using this throughout the course of the presentation this evening. And, it's going to be really interactive. This isn't going to be one of those things where I'm just sitting here talking at you for like 2 hours. I mean, we're here for an hour and a half. So hopefully we won't be here for 2 hours. But I want y'all to get used to using this. You can join on your phones. That's why we have the QR code on the screen. You can join at menti.com using the code at the top, or you can join with the link that's in the chat. So I will revisit this question here in a few moments. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint because I wanted to go ahead and get started with the stuff that I have on our agenda for today. And I was remiss in not thanking AAITE for inviting me to speak tonight. I was just kind of like, let's get this started, Kelly, let's do this. So thank you, AAITE, for having me tonight. I say tonight because I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and so it's currently 7 o'clock at night. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and get started. So in order for us to make ethical decisions, we have to be familiar with our codes of ethics. So I'm actually a medical interpreter by trade. So I am probably significantly more familiar with the medical interpreting codes of ethics. We have 3 of them nationally in the United States. But for educational interpreting, AAITE was the first organization to release a code of ethics for educational interpreters for K through 12 interpreting in the United States, which is super, super exciting. I read it like as soon as I could because I was super excited. It came out in December of last year. So just to give you all kind of an overview, we did have those pre-event activities that got sent out. So hopefully we were able to practice with those at least a little bit. That is not a substitute for reading the AAITE Code of Ethics for interpreters. So definitely, if you haven't had an opportunity to read that, please do at some point, hopefully this evening, if not tomorrow, okay? So I just wanted to give a very, very brief overview of this because I'm kind of assuming, perhaps incorrectly, that, we have at least some base knowledge of this. So we don't just have in the Code of Ethics for AAITE, we don't just have ethical principles, we also have these things called overarching values. So the overarching values, they are non-maleficence, which is do no harm, dignity, respect, honesty, and solidarity. So those are the overarching values. They're designed to kind of guide our moral behavior. We all have ideas of what being moral is. We have our own moral compass, but this is to get us all on the same page as educational interpreters. Then we have our ethical framework concepts. So if we think about the overarching values as kind of like an umbrella, the ethical framework concepts, they're related, but they're kind of within this umbrella. And the ethical framework concepts are integrated into each one of the ethical principles. So the two ethical framework concepts are communicative autonomy and cultural awareness. Okay, so within the ethical principles, we have these ethical framework concepts infused in them. And then each ethical principle has its own standards of practice, which kind of illustrate those ethical principles further. Now, something really, really important. I think about ethics in general, but I really, really like that the AAITE Code of Ethics is super, super explicit about this, is that a lot of people, I find a lot of interpreters tend to take what AAITE would call a normative approach to ethics. Whereas what we should be doing and the way we should be approaching ethics is descriptively, meaning that ethics aren't these things to tell us what to do and not do. Ethics provide us a foundation to help guide us to make our decisions. So it's not, well, the Code of Ethics says I can't do that. So that's this being a foundation, guiding interpreters to make decisions, walking across the stones in the water, having someone holding your hand doing it, kind of maybe putting their hand on your back and kind of guiding you a little bit. That's what the AAITE Code of Ethics is meant to do. And if you read the full document of the AAITE Code of Ethics, you will see there's this whole section in the beginning about normative versus descriptive ethics, and I love it. It's amazing. It's awesome. Highly recommend reading it. I get way too excited about ethics. Sorry, y'all. So that's descriptive ethics. Normative ethics is kind of viewing ethics like this. Like you're pointing your finger at a dog and you're saying, don't do that. Yes, do this, don't do that. So codes of ethics aren't designed to tell us what's right and what's wrong. They're designed to guide us. And in addition to that, the problem with thinking of ethics in a normative way versus a descriptive way is that we tend to kind of abandon critical thinking. Oftentimes I'll ask medical interpreters, well, why can't you stay in the room alone with a patient? And they'll tell me, well, the Code of Ethics says we can't do it. Where in the Code of Ethics does it say we can't do it? The thing is you have to use the ethical principles to guide you to that conclusion. It's not outright written in the Code of Ethics. So we need to be really, really careful when we're approaching ethics, not to approach it in this kind of dogmatic way. See, it's a dog. Not in this kind of like dogmatic way where we're like, oh, this is a list of what's right and wrong, like the 10 Commandments. That's not what ethics is. So I wanted to actually kind of go back and take a peek at our little poll. So we have 12 people have answered the poll so far. I know we have way more than 12 people here. So the link is in the chat. You can scan the QR code with your phone. I see some phones going right up to the screen right now. Okay. I see that we only have one person so far who's answered the poll, who's read the whole thing. Wait, let me go and answer it. I want to answer it. I've read the whole thing. There we go. Wait, no, did it not count my vote? Oh, I have to hit submit. All right. So at least 2 of us have read the whole thing. So highly, highly recommend. If you've only read part of it, if you only read that page with the ethical principles on it, you're going to have a bad time. Okay. And this is anonymous, so I can't see who you are, so don't feel ashamed. This is just to kind of give me an idea, and maybe AAITE an idea. All right. So I wanted to ask another question, but I think I'll hold off on asking that question for now until we have some more folks kind of responding and getting into the Mentimeter, because we will be using this throughout the event today. So going back to the PowerPoint, I wanted to show you the 6 ethical principles as outlined by AAITE. So we have, thank you, Eva, for showing the link again in the chat. So we have our 6 ethical principles here. We have accuracy, confidentiality, impartiality, professional conduct, professional development, and representation of qualifications. So these are the 6 AAITE ethical principles. I was talking with Giovanna the other day, and Giovanna was telling me, well, these are embedded in the medical interpreting codes of ethics. So if you're familiar with the medical interpreting codes of ethics, these aren't super, super far off. There's a lot of commonalities between them. And, I highly even encourage comparing the two, because I find comparative ethics has really, really helped me understand ethical principles more than I would otherwise. So these are the 6 ethical principles we're going to be working with today. Hopefully we're familiar with these. But really what we're focusing on today is solving ethical scenarios and engaging in ethical decision-making. So I like to think of ethical scenarios as experiments. So it's important when we're doing an experiment to follow a standardized process. So if you think about it, when you remember back in grade school, you probably did like science experiments and things like that. And you had your independent variables and your dependent variables and your control group. So if you were doing an experiment where you were trying to find out what the best thing is to water a plant with, you might have a group that you water with water, a group that you water with, I don't know, coffee, a group that you water with Pepsi. But then you're also going to have a group that you're not going to water with anything. And that's your standard of comparison. That's your control group. So it's really important to design experiments really, really well and have all of these things in the standardized process. Otherwise, what's going to happen is different people are going to do the experiment. It won't be the same experiment and come up with very different results. So using a standardized process as interpreters to solve ethical scenarios is a great way for us to be on the same page and come to similar conclusions. Otherwise, it's kind of like this picture. You have these other kiddos in the background, and they might be following the instructions of the experiment. But then these two little kids, they're super excited and they're doing their little experiment, but they're not following the instructions. And they're kind of going off course, and then they have unexpected results. So that's what having a standardized process is all about. And the other thing too, another way that I like to think about solving ethical scenarios is that each time I solve an ethical scenario, it gives me valuable data for future decision-making. So it helps me solve future ethical scenarios. So it makes me better at solving ethical scenarios because I have more experience and more data. So I firmly believe that just like practicing our consecutive interpretations, our simultaneous interpretations, studying our terminology, practicing our note-taking, all of the things that we do as interpreters, we should be practicing those things, but we also need to be practicing ethical scenarios as kind of part of our practice habits. So I've been talking this whole time about a standardized process. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the next question. So I see a lot of us have only read part of the AAITE Code of Ethics. A lot of us haven't, some of us haven't read it yet. A couple of us have read the whole thing. Again, highly recommend reading it from cover to cover, the whole dang thing. Sorry I said dang, but I am from the South, so we say things differently than people who are probably on the West Coast. So going to the next question, you've had plenty of time to answer that first question. I'm going to put this question up. And while that question is up, you're able to answer it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the CHIA ethical decision-making process. So AAITE has provided us with this ethical framework of the ethical principles, the overarching values, the framework principles, all of these things, okay? So those are kind of like if you're baking a cake, right? If you're baking a cake, you have a recipe, all right? And you have your ingredients. So your ethical principles are like your ingredients. So AAITE has given us the ingredients. So now let's give you the recipe for making your interpreter cake, okay? So that's what this ethical decision-making process is. And this is by CHIA, the California Healthcare Interpreting Association. It's embedded within their California standards for healthcare interpreters. And I'm saying this as an interpreter based out of Richmond, Virginia, okay? It's one of what I like to call the big three of the medical interpreting codes of ethics, the nationally, or at least the not necessarily nationally recognized, but definitely one of the three most important codes of ethics for medical interpreters. So this is within the California Healthcare Interpreting Association's Code of Ethics for medical interpreters. This is part of that. So the first step in this process, whenever you are facing something in the field or you're discussing something with colleagues, let's say you're like, okay, there's this situation and I have multiple courses of action I can take. What do I do? What's the correct course of action? Sometimes it might not be abundantly apparent, but sometimes you think you know the answer, and then you go through this process and you find out the answer that you come to is super different than the answer you initially thought, which just highlights why this process is so important. So the first step in this process is to ask questions to determine if there's a problem. We're not even stating what the problem is, because a lot of times when we're in the field, things are happening around us. And we just have to ask ourselves, okay, is this really a problem or am I maybe overthinking it? So first step, just determine if there's a problem. Step number 2, once you've determined, yes, we have a problem, cool, move on to step 2. Step 2 is, and I like to say step 2 is the only step that has 2 parts, so it's easy to remember 2, 2. Part 1 of step 2 is to identify and clearly state the problem. So you're going to put the problem in words. You're actually going to state what the problem is. And then the second part of step 2 is to consider the ethical principles that may apply and rank them in applicability. So you're going to take those 6 AAITE ethical principles and you're going to be like, okay, well, I think this one's the most related, this one's the second most related, et cetera, et cetera. That's what you're doing in this step. And yes, this is a process for healthcare interpreters, but it still applies to ethical decision-making in, gosh, really any specialization of interpretation, if you think about it. So it's super, super useful. Step 3, to clarify your personal values as they relate to the problem. So you're going to think about, okay, what are my values? And what are kind of like my knee-jerk reactions with this scenario going on, with this situation playing out? What are my beliefs? Okay, how might that play into this situation? Step 4 is to consider alternative actions, including benefits and risks. So what you're doing is you're coming up with different actions you could take in this particular scenario, and then you're looking at, okay, well, what are the pros and what are the cons? And you especially want to formulate this in terms of ethical principles. And that's why we did this in step 2. We ranked the ethical principles. So you're going to bring those ethical principles. Wait, I need to draw. It's drawing time. Wait, I need to bring this back. Those ethical principles. I'm going to bring them. Ooh, that was a crazy line. Oh, no. Okay. So I need to bring this into step 4 and then kind of be like, okay, this ethical principle goes in the pros. I'm honoring that ethical principle. This one goes in the cons. I'm not honoring it. And then I usually like to examine at least 3 actions in this step. Because what good is a science experiment if you're only looking at 2 things? Then you have good and bad. And ethics is not black and white like that. There's no good and bad. There's varying degrees of better, worse, okay? And then step 5, you're going to choose an action based on your analysis, and you're going to do the thing. And then step 6, you evaluate the outcome and consider what might be done differently next time. So you're going to be like, oh, things turned out well. Things didn't turn out too well. How could things be different next time? If I were to go through the same scenario, what could I have done differently? Or I even like to think about what could I have done to have prevented the situation from even happening? But this is a very wordy process. It's lots of words. So I like to make it a little bit shorter. Ask questions if they're, wait, can't even English. Too many words, I can't English. Ask questions to determine if there's a problem. Problem question mark. Problem question mark. Come on now, here we go. Problem question mark. Sorry. Lost my flow there for a second. So I do have a video on my YouTube channel where I go over how to memorize this ethical decision-making process. I provided a PDF version of the slides to the lovely folks at AAITE, so you should be getting a copy of those. So sorry, I forgot the shameless self-promotion. That's why I went off my flow. So step 1, problem question mark. Step 2, identify and clearly state the problem considering the ethical principles that may apply and ranking them applicability. Okay, that's a lot. ID problem, rank ethical principles. Step 3, clarify personal values as they relate to the problem. Personal values. Step 4, consider alternative actions, including benefits and risks. Actions, pros and cons. And now this is my personal favorite. Y'all have to look at the slide for this one. You have to. It's obligatory, okay? If I could take attendance right now, I would, just by you looking at the slide. Choose an action and carry it out. Or as Shia LaBeouf said it, do it. Do it, okay? And then step 6, maybe that's an old, maybe people don't recognize that one. I don't know. It was like around like the 2010s-ish. I don't know. Last one, evaluate the outcome and consider what might be done differently next time. Evaluate outcome, okay? So this is our ethical decision-making process. And now I'm going to go to the browser and see who is familiar with this process. Okay. Well, I only have 11 people who've answered this. That makes me sad. Please don't make me sad. Please answer my polls because we're going to be doing a lot of polls today. Get comfortable with it. Pro tip, if you are answering the poll on the same computer that you're joining Zoom on, if you are on a PC, like a Windows PC, one of my favorite tricks is to do Alts. You hold down Alts and then you tap Tab, and that'll let you go between all your windows. So just letting you know that that's a little trick you can use if you're on a PC or Windows. If you're on a Mac, I'm sorry, I don't know how to help you. But it looks like like half of us are not familiar with the CHIA ethical decision-making process. That's okay. A lot of medical interpreters aren't, so I'm not sure how many of us are medical interpreters or have experience in medical interpretation, but in my experience, a lot of medical interpreters aren't familiar with this process either. A couple of us are, so maybe like a third of us. So that's pretty cool. That's helpful for me to know. All right. Well, now here's what we're going to do. Okay. So we have our ethical decision-making process, and now we're going to, as a group, all together now, we're going to work through a scenario together. And I'm actually going to be doing each step in Mentimeter. I find that to be a lot easier than the chaos of getting people to raise their hands and share their opinions. So this is just a good way to get like a consensus and get it pretty quick. So, and I'm going to show you how I work through it. All right. So you're going to see, I'm going to let y'all answer in the polls, but then I'm also going to show you how I do it. So you're going to get some guided feedback here. All right. So this is our example scenario. And again, I want to thank Giovanna for sending me these scenarios because I was having a really hard time coming up with scenarios for y'all today. So thanks, Giovanna. So this is our example scenario. I, the interpreter, have been working at the school for quite a few years. I know the teachers and the school staff pretty well, as I've interpreted for most of them on a regular basis. Yesterday, I went to interpret for an initial evaluation for an IEP. As I entered the classroom, the father, student, and teacher were already there. The family arrived early. Tell me how many times has that happened to you? That happens to me a lot. But yeah, either they arrive late or they arrive early. It's very, very rare that people arrive exactly on time, right? And then after a few minutes of introductions, the teacher turns to me and says, "Hello, how are you? It's a pretty busy day today. I have a lot of meetings. You know all the questions I ask at the beginning? In fact, you probably know them in your sleep by now. Can you ask him those questions while I go and get the students' records?" Which I forgot. I'll be right back. All right, so just a kind of paraphrased walkthrough in the scenario. So you've been, interpreting at the school for quite some time. You're interpreting for this initial evaluation for an IEP. We have father, we have student, we have teacher. Family arrived early. And then the teacher is basically asking you to ask the questions that they would normally ask at the beginning of the meeting while they go away and do something. Okay. So we're going to go through the ethical decision-making process. And I will be putting the scenario back up intermittently. So you'll be seeing the scenario again. Not just going to show it to you for 5 seconds and be like, haha, good luck. So it'll be back, I promise. So we're going to go through the first step. The first step. So we're going to go back to the browser here in a second, but our first step is problem question mark. So you're going to ask questions to determine if there's a problem. So, is there a problem? Yes or no? Is there a problem? All right. Okay, I don't think we've had a single no so far. That's kind of what I was expecting. Yeah. So I think it's pretty safe to say we got a problem. So going back to my slide here, Houston, we have a problem. That's it. That's step one. You just have to determine if there's a problem or not. Now I'm going to tell you something really funny, actually. I was using this slide in my class for like 2 years before I realized there was a Star Destroyer in the astronaut's visor from Star Wars. Man, I'm not very observant, apparently. So step 2 of this process, so the entire CHIA ethical decision-making process is actually at the top of the slide. So it will be up during most of the slides. It's the scenario that's not going to be up with the slides, every single slide. Which I know that's kind of annoying and kind of isn't very helpful, Kelly, but sorry, that's kind of how it is. I'll put it back up in a bit. So step 2 is, you remember that step with 2 parts? We're going to identify the problem and we're going to rank the ethical principles. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the scenario back up on the screen, and behind the scenes, I'm going to move on to the next question in Mentimeter, which is actually going to allow you to type on your own what you think the problem is. So you get to type what you think the problem is in the scenario that I have up on the screen. And what I'll do is, while you are typing the problem in your own words into the Mentimeter, I'm going to read the scenario one more time as it's up on the screen, just so for those of you who might be looking at another device and might not be able to read and answer my question at the same time. So you're the interpreter, you've been working at the school for quite some time. You know the teachers, you know the staff, you've interpreted for most of them on a regular basis. So you're interpreting for an initial evaluation for an IEP. So you have dad, you have the student, you have the teacher. They arrived early. And the teacher asks if you can ask the questions that they would normally ask at the beginning of the meeting, because you've interpreted a lot of these before. You probably have these questions memorized, right? Because the teacher has to go and get some records from elsewhere. So they'll be right back. So they want to leave you with the father and son to ask them these questions. Okay? So we have some responses already. Let's see here. So let's see. Someone says breaching role boundaries. Okay. So we're identifying an ethical principle as a problem. We're not part of the team. The teacher's asking us to do the work. So again, role boundaries. So I just want us all to remember that we're focusing on the AAITE Code of Ethics, which in the AAITE Code of Ethics, role boundaries or maintaining boundaries, which is a medical interpreting ethical principle, is not an ethical principle in and of itself. It's part of professional conduct. So yes, we're not respecting those role boundaries. Yes, we totally need to respect those role boundaries, right? I think we have a lot of the same responses, asking us to do a job that's not our job. Okay. Teachers asking me that I step out of my role. People are identifying more ethical principles, professional conduct, and accuracy. Remember, we're not identifying ethical principles yet. That's not until the second part of this step. Left alone with family. I was wondering that too. Is there anyone else present in the room? Or is it just me, dad, and the son if the teacher's leaving? I actually don't think this is a likely scenario for an IEP because they don't do questions at the beginning. They do intros, state why they're there, go into the strengths, weaknesses, etc. So it seems to be an initial evaluation for an IEP, not the IEP meeting itself. All right, so let's see what Kelly had to say about the problem. In my own words, what is the problem? So here's what I said the problem was in my own words. The teacher is asking me to fill in their role and interpret, and I put interpret in quotations because am I really interpreting if I'm recalling something from memory that didn't even occur that day, but from a previous day? And they're asking me to recall this in stuff from the past, from memory. So it's kind of like a compound problem in that, okay, yes, they're asking me to step out of my role, but they're also asking me to do something where accuracy, there's really no way to be accurate here. I'd be summarizing. I wouldn't really even be interpreting. So that's the first part of step 2. Now, the second part of step 2 is to rank the ethical principles as they apply to this scenario. So I just put all the ethical principles up on the screen. So I'm going to move on to the next question in Mentimeter, which is actually you get to rank the ethical principles. And the really cool thing, oopsies, the really cool thing about this is that we get to see how all of us as a group are ranking these ethical principles as they relate to the scenario. Which ethical principles we think are most related would be at the top, least related at the bottom. So we're ranking from most relevant to least relevant. And this is one of those things that takes a moment. So while you all are ranking your ethical principles, I'm going to kind of show you how I rank my ethical principles, because when we're ranking our ethical principles, we don't always have Mentimeter in front of us where we can drag and drop our ethical principle. So the first thing I kind of do is I pick out the ethical principles that are most related. Now, difficult to say, don't let this influence your responses, but I'm going to say it anyways. Don't let this influence your responses. So what I might do is I look at my problem and I say, okay, which ethical principles are most related? Okay, so fill in for their role. That's part of professional conduct. Accuracy, I feel like is related because they're asking me to recall something from memory from the past, not necessarily interpreting, but kind of summarizing. So that kind of gives me the first part of my ranking. And then what I'll do is I'll actually go through the remaining ethical principles and make an argument for or against them being related. And usually in the process of making those arguments, going through each ethical principle, I'm going to come up with a pretty good idea of what my ranking is going to look like. So I'm going to go back to the browser because I do see we have like 10 responses so far. And it's going to change a little bit as more people submit their responses, but this is what we have so far. So we have accuracy is the most related, seems to be the consensus among y'all. Professional conduct, second most related. Then we have confidentiality, impartiality. Impartiality is tied with representation of qualifications at this point. Professional development is kind of the last one that we have here. Okay. Let's see if Kelly had something similar. So I put professional conduct up at the top for me. That I just felt like it was more related. But I kind of think we're in a consensus that professional conduct and accuracy are kind of like the first two. So I go through the rest of the ethical principles. I'm like, are they related? Are they not related? Come on, slide. So I think impartiality is related here because, you know, if I'm siding with the teacher and doing what the teacher asks, I'm taking the teacher's side. But if I don't do what the teacher asks, it kind of seems like they might think I'm like siding against them or siding with the family. You know, part of impartiality is taking sides. Part of it is keeping your biases, beliefs, thoughts, and opinions to yourself. Confidentiality, definitely related, because especially if the teacher's leaving and things are said out of their presence, you know, that's a confidentiality issue. I was kind of like professional development. I didn't really feel like it was related, so I can see why y'all put it at the bottom. I do, at first I was kind of like, about representational qualifications, but what kind of impression are you giving the father and the son about you and your abilities and your qualifications if you're doing the job of the teacher when the teacher leaves? So you're not directly saying, I am a teacher and I am qualified to do this, but you're kind of saying it through your actions, right? If you do it. So then from there, I can kind of make my ranking. So in my ranking, I had professional conduct, accuracy, confidentiality, impartiality, representation of qualifications, and professional development. So y'all had confidentiality for third as well. And then you had impartiality. Then you had a very similar ranking. That's awesome. Because sometimes I do this and the ranking is just like, it looks nothing like it, nothing like it. And I'm like, whoa, okay, we need to review our ethical principles. So it seems like even if we haven't read the AAITE Code of Ethics, we have at least a general understanding of what these ethical principles mean, which is good. That doesn't mean that you're off the hook for reading the AAITE Code of Ethics, I might add. So definitely still read it. All right. So that's y'all's ranking. This is my ranking. All right. So we're only on step 2. I'm already getting behind. Oh no. So most related at the top, least related at the bottom. Now, this is the ranking as it is. I don't know why it splits it up into 2 parts. Now, the next step is where we consider our personal values. So I'm actually going to move on to the next step in Mentimeter. And you all are welcome to respond in Mentimeter about your personal values as they relate to the problem. So I'm just going to kind of give you a little peek inside of Kelly's head. This is the peek inside my head, okay? So my values, empathy is important, okay? To me, okay, the teacher, maybe the family arrived early. Maybe the teacher didn't have an opportunity to go get the records they were originally planning on getting, and they had to stay with the family, okay? So just being empathetic to me is important, but at the same time, has anyone ever heard the quote, empathy without boundaries is self-destruction, right? So yes, I can be understanding, but at the same time, boundaries are important. Boundaries are a personal value of mine. They also align really nicely and neatly with ethical principles. And then the third thing, and this is something that I saw y'all commenting on earlier, is that, you know, this is unfair to the family with limited English proficiency. So if it were an English-speaking family, would there be an interpreter there for them to kind of like pawn off some of their responsibilities on? No. So why are you expecting that to be the case with a family with limited English proficiency. So it just doesn't seem like very equal treatment to me. And equality is very important to me. I'm a Libra, okay? So let's see. Going back to the browser. Integrity, professionalism, trust. So a lot of ethical principles are not just ethical principles to you, they're personal values. So integrity, I see that as part of honesty, right? Honesty is one of the overarching values in the AAITE Code of Ethics. The family's there to talk to the teacher, not me. What if there are questions about the questions, right? I want to be helpful, but it's not my job. Yeah, totally valid here. Now, I would say if anyone were to like respond to that and be like, I am so angry at this teacher, like this teacher is just really what they are doing is very much conflicting with my values, my beliefs. What I would say is if you have strong feelings or strong, like a really, really present values in your life that are coming to mind and making it difficult for you to make decisions, you might want to go back to step 2 and rank impartiality a little bit higher. That's really what I see this step for. You cannot prevent your biases, beliefs, thoughts, and opinions from interfering unless you're aware of them first. Period. So that's step 3. We just take a pause and consider our personal values. And then we consider different actions that we can take in this scenario. So we consider alternative actions, including benefits and risks. So I like to listen. I can open up the question in Mentimeter for y'all, what possible actions you might take. I will have that open for you, but considering Kelly is running a little bit behind on time, I might not have an opportunity to review those. Just want to put that out there. So I always like to consider at least 3 actions. I had to pick some actions before I couldn't make slides unless I had actions pre-picked out. And I like to think of kind of going with the flow as like a control action. If you were doing a science experiment, like that one where you're watering the plants, you would probably have one where you wouldn't water the plant with anything, and that would be your control group. So that's usually either just kind of doing nothing. So in this case, kind of going with the flow and doing what the teacher says. By no means am I saying this is the correct course of action. It's just one that we're going to examine in this step. And that way we can get some data. So let's pretend in this action that we're going to do what the teacher says. We're going to ask Dad the questions. We're going to take notes. We're going to report them to the teacher when he returns. Another action we could consider is interjecting, explaining our role, and then interpreting. And that order is very important, which we'll discuss that a little bit later. So saying to the teacher, this is the interpreter speaking. I can only interpret what people are saying as they say it. That's one example of an interjection. And I think, honestly, that's probably what a lot of us would do. But sometimes the specificity comes in exactly what interjection you're using. So sometimes you might have 3 actions you're examining where there's 3 different interjections, which I think that's a really good way to go about this. You don't have to look at just 3, but we're going to limit it to 3 just for this exercise. And then the last thing that I have here is just interpret. So these are just 3 actions that I'm looking at. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying we're going to look at them in this process. And so I see y'all have some other actions that you might do. Respectfully decline. Okay. So in a way, interjecting the way I described is declining. You could test out 3 different ways of declining. That could be 3 separate actions that you look at. Do nothing. Wait for the teacher. Explain my role. So sit there and wait for the teacher to come back. Wait outside until the teacher returns. Start, but let teacher know you will wait until they come back. Stay, not start. I love the correction, how to pop down right there. Tell the teacher something like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with this. What if they have clarifying questions? Okay. If the teacher felt comfortable to ask you to do that in the first place, there may be something you've done in the past that in this case, it's a he, thinks it's okay to do that. So I will say that you can do everything right. And still people will ask you to do things that are not reasonable asks of you. Just want to put that out there, okay? All right. So then what you do in this process is you're actually going to, I'm going to turn off the Mentimeter for the rest of the steps for this, just to make sure that we get through the example scenario, because we are going to have an opportunity to go to breakout rooms. But I just want to show you the rest of this process in action. Okay, so I'm going to show it to you. So if you remember the ethical principles that we ranked in step 2, what we're going to do is we're actually going to bring them in now. So we're going to examine our 3 actions. Okay, so our first action, do what the teacher says, and we're going to take those ethical principles that we ranked previously. So this is pretty much how I ranked these ethical principles. All right. I ranked these ones: professional conduct, accuracy, confidentiality, impartiality, and representation of qualifications as cons. So that gives us 5 cons. And, there are definitely some pros that we could think about here, right? Like the teacher's not going to be mad at you, but is that an ethical principle? I don't really think so. So if we look at action 2, you take those ethical principles that we ranked. I know I'm going through this really fast, but Kelly got behind. So I ranked these ones, these ethical principles from the AAITE Code of Ethics, as pros. Thank you all for letting me know that you couldn't see the slide. This is what I do sometimes. So I'm going to go back, do what the teacher says. That was the first action I looked at. I had these as cons, these 5 ethical principles. So that puts us at 5 cons. And then interject and explain my role, and then interpret. So interject and explain, excuse me, this is the interpreter speaking. I just want to remind you that I can only interpret things as they are said. I cannot retroactively interpret or something along those lines. And then interpret not only what the teacher said, but also your interjection. So I put as pros, professional conduct. You're sticking to your role, right? Accuracy, confidentiality, impartiality. Actually, I'm pretty sure I put all of them in the pros column here. Yeah, I put all of these in pros. So this one actually has all of them in the pros column. So that gives us 5 pros. What are the cons? Okay, they might not be ethical principles that are cons, but in this particular case, one of the cons is the teacher might be annoyed with you, but not annoying people by doing our job is not one of our standards of practice. Definitely need to be respectful, but sometimes we can do the right thing and we can do it respectfully and people still get annoyed. And then the third action, just interpret. I had as a con professional conduct. Pro was accuracy. Pro was confidentiality. Con was impartiality. And a pro was representation of qualification. Okay, so in this case, I had 3 pros and 2 cons. Now, of course, there are other cons for action number 3, but in the interest of time, we're going to save those for later, okay? And so then you go through, now, if you're solving these ethical scenarios in like a setting like this, in a group setting where you're solving them with other people, you can't really actually choose an action and do an action. But in the case of the actions we just looked at, let me actually go back. The action with the most pros and the least cons was action number 2 out of the 3 actions that were examined, okay? So of the actions we examined, number 2, interject, explain role, interpret, all right? We won't need the link for the Mentimeter until we come back from the breakout rooms. Okay, but I will be giving a link here shortly to the document that we will be using in breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. And then the last step is to evaluate the outcome. Now, of course, you can't do this if you're examining it in a group with other people. You can only do this if you actually do it out in the field. Okay? So I'm going to give you an outcome. Just, I can give you one, right? So the teacher is actually annoyed with you for doing this and is visibly impatient. Now, while you're interpreting what was said, the teacher walks away. You're assuming to get the records. So even though we did the best action out of what we examined, we still had maybe not the best outcome. So what could be done differently next time? Well, I definitely say if we haven't given a pre-session, if we haven't, and now I'm not sure if you all in the educational world still call it a pre-session or not, or a pre-conference or an introduction, but if we haven't given that, because there was no indication in the scenario that one was given. That's a given. Now you could have still given it and it could have still happened. So kind of considering, okay, well, how could we tweak this approach? And then you can even go back to step number 4 and choose different actions, kind of tweak the actions that you picked and even go through this process further, kind of recursively. Okay, so just because we chose an action in step 4 doesn't mean that that's going to be the answer. Okay, it just means that out of the actions that you examined, the action that we chose is probably ethically sound and ethically the best one out of the 3. So I apologize for going a little over my time here, but we are going to do some scenarios, a scenario in groups. So you're going to be getting a Google document with the scenario in it. It's also going to have these instructions as well as these tips in them. So maybe consider doing a Google Doc with your group, not skipping steps. I know this can be a lengthy process, especially if you're engaging in critical thinking. And then try to examine at least 3 actions. You might not have time to go through the whole 6-step process, but at least kind of getting in the flow, getting in the habit of using this process is what we're going to be doing in breakout rooms. So we're going to be in breakout rooms of like 3 or 4 people. And okay, so Anna, you posted the Mentimeter link in the chat. What I would like to do is share the link to let me copy the link, to the Google Doc that we will be using in our breakout rooms. So this is the Google Doc in the chat. And then we can do the magic of sending every one of their breakout rooms with about maybe 3 to 4 people. And we'll be in breakout rooms for like 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So are you ready? Are we ready?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the breakout rooms.
All right, so breakout rooms is starting now.
All right. Okay. So what I think is, so it was 55 after, so at 20 minutes would put him at 15, at 15 after.
Yep.
Ooh. Let's see how many people aren't joining their breakout rooms. All right. Keeping an eye out. Yeah, I'm a little off on my timing tonight. I do apologize.
Alex no va a ir porque está manejando. Y Jennifer.
Hi.
Hey.
When everybody's in the breakout room, I want you to say hi.
Hi.
Landed in California, listen to the whole presentation. So I am really looking forward for everybody to come back. So I am here, the 2 of us listening to the
Oh,
webinar.
awesome.
Hi, Kelly. I
Hi,
am
who's
with
that?
Jennifer.
Oh, hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, you caught me off my game tonight. I'm a little bit behind. I'm so sorry about that. It's actually
And
my
then
first, I think it's my first time seeing you actually like me and you actually talking on camera, Jennifer.
Yes,
Oh, really? No,
Yeah, because
actually, no. Remember you did it.
that's
It was
right. The
for
AMM,
the
NCIC
sorry.
AMM.
NCHIC a couple
I
years
remember.
ago. I ended your session. Yeah.
I remember. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
A question. I have a couple of people that need to be sent to a breakout room before we continue chatting. I'm gonna pause the recording.
Sounds good. I'm actually going to be sharing my screen once again. All right, it's a really weird thing where you're going to see my face twice because I have to. I know everyone wants to see my face. That's what it is. All right. So, welcome back, everyone. Let's see here. Let me get my windows all switched up. The most difficult part of being in a Zoom meeting is getting all the moving pieces of technology working together cohesively. So I will say that we are going to be going back to Mentimeter. Let me get the right window open here. We have about 13 minutes to kind of talk about what we did. Of course, it sounds like most of us did not get through the entire process. So now you see why Kelly was running a little bit behind, because working through this process, once you actually start going through it, and this is a nice thing about having a standardized process, is that it actually kind of forces you to think about this in a more critical way, and really think about the scenario in depth versus just thinking, oh, well, this is what I would do, or, things like that. So going through a standardized process makes us actually engage in critical thinking when we otherwise might not do so. So I am going to leave this question in Mentimeter up. I'm going to go back to the chat, which again, got to get that open because everything's changed. All right. So there's the Mentimeter link again. I was hearing a lot of things as I was going through the groups. You all probably saw my face kind of pop up and then go away. So I did notice that some of us were following the steps out of order. And this is very common. To kind of do the steps out of order and for your first instinct when you start going through this process to be like, well, this is what I would do. I have to tell my classes every time I teach them this process, I have to tell them, don't skip steps. We're not on that step yet. Step 1 is, step 2 is. So following the steps and really forcing yourself to stay within those steps, super, super helpful. And I did notice that maybe 1 or 2 groups were having a bit of a difficult time ranking the ethical principles. It sounds like most of us got through, we got to like step 3, maybe started getting into step 4 a little bit. So this can also kind of highlight your gaps in ethical knowledge. So if you go through the ethical decision-making process and you're not 100% familiar with the ethical principles, it can be really, really difficult to rank them and to use them. But by using them and being forced to rank them, this can actually be really, really helpful in more deeply understanding the codes of ethics. Let's see here. I heard we all did a really good job at identifying what the problem was. I really, really love that because sometimes that can actually be a really tricky step. So I really love the scenarios that Giovanna provided me because they're really detailed scenarios. So it really forces you to actually go through steps 1 and 2 extensively. I will say the Google Doc that I was encouraging you all to use together as a group, I shared with you a Google Doc. It was not an editable Google Doc, but some of you created your own Google Docs. Some of you shared a copy and started writing notes in there. But that Google Doc, creating your own Google Doc, was more of an idea to get yourself and your group oriented, navigated on the same page. So here's what we have with our little rating poll. So my group was able to successfully navigate the CHIA ethical decision-making process. Yeah, I mean, we didn't get fully through the process, right? So you can see that this process, it takes time, but it really is. I'm really glad. See, this makes me very happy to see this. And again, it's anonymous, so I can't like bring down the wrath of Kelly on anyone who ranks low. So most of us ranked this. Someone did rank it at a 1. That's fair. We have multiple people ranked it at a 4 or a 5, that it's useful, that it's productive. So if we had some difficulties navigating the CHIA ethical decision-making process, part of that's on me because Kelly didn't get through all of her stuff tonight. So I appreciate your grace and understanding, your empathy, remember. Your group was familiar with the ethical principles. I saw that. I feel like the one that a lot of people were getting hung up on was professional conduct. It's a very expansive ethical principle. So being familiar with those standards of practice can really, really help you understand all of the things that the ethical principle encompasses. And again, you have those pre-event activities that should have been sent out to you. I know they were sent out to you. So those pre-event activities can be really, really good, great exercises for you to familiarize yourself even further with the ethical principles, but not a replacement for reading the AAITE Code of Ethics. Now, I don't think any groups decided on an action for their scenario. But if you feel that you maybe had a little bit of a discussion or got into a little bit of a discussion about what the correct course of action would be, you're certainly welcome to do that and answer in the Mentimeter. I suppose we do have like about 8 minutes left. So I did want to, and if this is okay with the folks at AAITE, open the floor up to anyone who would like to share any thoughts, opinions, musical numbers about how it was kind of going through this process. And I would really appreciate it if we used the Zoom raise hand feature. So if you don't know where the Zoom raise hand feature is, wait a second, I can show you. This is my screen. So you have your Zoom bar. Yours is probably down at the bottom of the screen. And you can see all the people that I see on the right-hand side. Mine is going to be under more because I'm a co-host. But yours is probably going to be a button down here that says reactions. So you go to reactions and then you click on raise hand. And then you can see up in the top left, right-hand corner, whatever corner it shows up in on yours. That's where your hand's going to show up. So does anyone have any thoughts, any kind of observations they had in their group? I heard some really interesting discussions going on. So if y'all don't share, I'll share some of what I heard. Anyone want to share? So why am I going to my PowerPoint? Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia.
Hello, Kelly. Thanks for coming to our group and helping to guide us. One of the possible actions that we spoke of is requesting a break and checking in with the therapist, but also keeping in mind the need for the emotions of the two individuals, the student and the parent. So I'd have to think about how else, how to do it, but that importance that all three parties here are impacted by unexpected things, and it's a challenging scenario.
Yes, it is a challenging scenario, isn't it? And I really enjoyed listening to you all discuss the scenario in your group. And I really do appreciate all the work that you did in your group, like in the chat and everything. That was great. So we have to remember that we don't just have the ethical principles, right? We also have our overarching values and our framework concepts. And one of the overarching values is respect. And I really, really like, where is it? Really, really like the way that we have defined respect in the AAITE Code of Ethics. If you think I didn't have it up in the background, you were wrong. It's here. Okay. So these are our ethical principles, right? Up. See, if this were the NCIHC Code of Ethics, I would be like, it's on page 34. So, respect. I love this. Respect is demonstrating regard for the feelings, wishes, rights, or traditions of others. So yeah, and I think we had talked about, we were talking about like kind of like making sure that some space is given to those big emotions. And that can be kind of tricky because it's like, okay, is it our responsibility or is it the therapist's responsibility? So like professional conduct and role boundaries can be a little tricky. I'm going to tell y'all that you're going to be getting a document where you actually you'll see I felt so guilty sending this to AAITE because this document is very, very lengthy. It's me going through the ethical decision-making process with the scenario that you all went through in groups. So you all have been through like the first 3 steps. So look at this, y'all. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. You're going to get this. I promise. I'm too much. I'm too extra. This is why I got behind. But if you got through about like step 3 with your group, maybe got into step 4 a little bit, you'll be able to kind of check your work, see like, okay, how was I doing? By no means am I trying to say that this is the only right way to solve ethical scenarios. It just kind of gives you an idea of, well, what does it look like? If I'm struggling with a particular step, what does it look like? And getting maybe a little bit of guidance. I might not be there with you, but I'm there in spirit in this document, okay? So you got it. You got a bunch of resources. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to share about their experience in their breakout room going through the scenario? I know you didn't get to go through the whole scenario, but at least you got to go through some of it. Maybe we have some potential actions here. Let's see. So making sure the therapist understands that you will in fact be interpreting everything that's said in the room. And you can raise your hands at any time. Possible withdrawal if the emotions make you incapable of staying on task. So if there's a conflict of interest for you, definitely recusing yourself or attempting to recuse yourself if at all possible. But Marisol, I see you've raised your hand.
Yes. Hey, Kelly. Hey, so I was in a group with Evangelina, and we discussed that maybe mentioning in the pre-session, pre-conference about not omitting information and that we're there to interpret everything. And then I think that would take care of that whole problem in being asked to omit information as the interpreter, right? And then also at the beginning where it says that I had little to no time to think I had to go, it seemed a little rushed. So maybe getting as much information prior to the assignment, even if you are rushed, that way you can decide if it's a type of assignment that you're able to do and not being getting too over emotionally involved. So I think those are the 2 approaches that we discussed in our group as actions to take for future situations.
Yeah, I often think of those preventative actions, even though technically that's something that you would think about in step 6. And Marisol, you were in my classes, right? Yeah. So no, you weren't? I thought you were. You're so familiar. I feel like you've been to some of my stuff before.
We met at, in Charlotte.
That's what it was. That's what it was. It's so hard to I knew it. Okay.
Yeah.
So those preventative actions, you're supposed to think about them in step 6, but that's kind of like, okay, if you haven't thought about them up until this point, think about them in step 6. But oftentimes I'll start thinking about those preventative actions after step 1 or before step 1 or after step 2. And that's okay. You can think about them then, but the steps are there to keep you organized, to make sure that you do all of these things, ideally in order, but sometimes going a little bit out of order, as thoughts come up, especially if you have a good one, is okay. So you don't have to be super dogmatic about it. Remember, descriptive, not normative. So I wanted to double check with AAITE. I know we're coming to the end of our time. I don't want to take up any more time than I need to. Is there anything y'all would like to, announcements, anything like that?
I am going, this is Giovanna. Hello, everybody. And before I leave the last words to Eva and Alex, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Kelly. Thank you so very much. I wanted to reinforce some of the points that you made very briefly. Number 1, ladies and gentlemen, when I contacted Kelly to say, hey, would you like to partner with us on this? Kelly had the entire code of ethics with full of colors, notes, questions, and it really is what each one of us should do, because ethics, ethical behavior, and principles are there to protect us. And they help us navigate when we are in the midst of something. So exactly, that goes back to the fact that it is very good to think of preventative actions, but the fact that we want to implement the preventative actions will not spare us from having to resolve some of our challenges. And so the discipline that Kelly really insisted on is about let's really dive into the exercise of dealing with it, because the more we train our brain, the better we equip ourselves to be fast thinkers in the outside world in our profession. Kelly has brought up the example of the baker, the recipe. I bring up the example of the car or the marathon. You just don't show up and start running. You have to prepare. And those are all pieces that we need. And so we hope that with this guidance, we have already run a very similar workshop, and Kelly has presented on the Edu-Talk. We are building enough resources that will be shortly made available to all of you to study on your own time. And don't forget that you have a community of fellow colleagues and friends in interpreting and translation. So reach out in case of doubts or questions. Thank you again, Kelly. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. And I want to leave the last words to Eva or to Alex if they are available.
Just checking with Alex. Seems like he's not. So, well, thank you. Yes, just seconding what you just said. Thank you so much for attending. Kelly, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I really love the way you walk us through all these steps. When I first saw those chia steps a few years ago, yeah, I love the simplification. I definitely like how you just make it simple, right? And so thank you for that. That was extremely helpful. And I just want to remind my colleagues about our future events. Of course, we have EduCon, is the biggest event of the year for AAITE, and we are very excited. We're going to be in Washington, D.C., and you can tell a little bit more about Advocacy Day, please.
So all of you, be ready. We are going on Capitol Hill on May the 2nd, which is a Thursday. We need you to sign up because based on people and the states where they're joining from, we are setting up meetings with our Congress people. So please, please, please go and sign up. If you want to fly in the same day, depending on where you're coming from, those meetings will not start before 10. So that can give you an idea, unless you want to fly in the day before. May 3rd and May 4th will be full 2 days of EduCon conference. We start with the pre-session with the skill building sessions on Friday morning. There are 3 to choose from. And there is a lot of presentations in general sessions that we are going to run starting early afternoon on Friday until Saturday past 5:30. I think we're going to be finishing at 6 with all our awards and welcoming and greetings and bye-bye. So please, 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 we are going to have the block of the rooms at a special discount that is going to be expiring on Sunday night. So take advantage of that because otherwise cost will add up. We try to make it as affordable as possible. We need also you to not to miss the early bird and not to miss the discounts on the hotel. Any other questions, please text us or send us an email at info@aait.org. And please come. We have lots of good things prepared for you.
Looking forward to it. And yes, of course, also you can submit your questions in our social media channels and we are there to help you. And what else? Well, yes, see you in Washington, D.C. And if you're here in Riverside for the conference, see you tomorrow and say hi. I'm here. I came from Oakland, so I'm very excited. And
And I'm here too.
Oh, and I'm here too.
if we don't make it this year, maybe next year, but yeah, or at EduCon. Great to see you. Great seeing you, everybody, and have a great rest of this afternoon, evening. Sorry.
Yes.
I don't know where I'm at anymore.
Bye-bye, and a special bye-bye to my people from Colorado.
Yay.
Thank you, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.